Good morning and welcome. My name is Margaret Daoud Gray, and I'm the Director of Education Policy and Workforce Preparedness at the Silicon Valley Leadership Group. Thank you for joining us today. To start, I'd like to thank our sponsors. We're going to do this in the ever-efficient leadership group style of one clap after each sponsor name. So let's see if we can get this to work and wake us all up a little bit. KQED, Synopsys, Nexenta, Applied Materials, Synix, Chabot Las Positas Community College District. When we don't get something right, we try again. Chabot Las Positas Community College District. Veritas, Deloitte, Google, San Jose Evergreen Community College District, UC Santa Cruz, Cadence, Block Construction, San Jose State University,
my own alma mater, and I messed up the class.
And lastly, Microsoft, thank you for hosting us. Also, I would like to thank my colleagues who have put in so much effort to make today possible: Paul Escobar, David Palter, Alyssa Cisneros, Damani Wilson, Arya Catano, and the rest of my leadership group colleagues who are volunteering their time to help today. With that, please give a warm welcome to President and CEO of the Silicon Valley Leadership Group, Carl Guardino.
Peanut butter and chocolate. When I was a kid, Reese's peanut butter cups were introduced. If you remember that wonderful commercial of someone walking down a flight of stairs in what looked like a school building, eating peanut butter out of a jar, colliding with someone walking up that flight of stairs with a chocolate bar, colliding with each other and realizing two great items together were even better. That's the role of your Silicon Valley Leadership Group in bringing together employers and educators, both vital to the success of Silicon Valley and our innovation economy, but better when we work together. Our role today is to continue to bring together that great combination. I want to thank again and recognize my colleagues, led by Margaret Daoud Gray, who have worked so hard over so many months with passion and professionalism to make today possible. Will Margaret Daoud Gray, Alyssa Cisneros, David Palter, and Paul Escobar please stand for a moment so that we can appreciate you? If we do our roles well, today and outside of this beautiful facility, we can help solve the twin challenge plaguing our region of rebuilding our middle class and further diversifying our technology workforce to better reflect the wonderful diversity of our region in terms of gender and ethnicity by broadening our STEM pipeline. I hope that excites you. It invigorates us. I'd like to put someone on the spot, so I hope she doesn't mind and doesn't turn red. But when I look in the faces of such incredible leaders here today, someone who has served as a mentor and a role model in that combined pursuit, both professionally, personally, and through her foundation, is with us. Never seeking the limelight, always seeking solutions. Would you join me in recognizing here today Becky Morgan from the Morgan Family Foundation? We also want to thank our elected leaders who are with us today. If you're an elected leader or hoping to one day be an elected leader, will you please stand and stay standing for a moment? Wow. Thanks for partnering with us all year long to make our valley better for each of us. I also want to thank any teachers, any educators that we have with us today who are on the front lines of this mutual goal to move forward. Teachers who are with us today, please stand. Outstanding. Thank you. With that, we are so blessed to have visionary member companies, 375 in total, that own the Silicon Valley Leadership Group. One of the jewels in that crown is where we are today, Microsoft, with such a huge and growing presence of innovation in our region. To join us and to welcome us to this beautiful facility today is Microsoft Director of Government Affairs and a friend of 2 decades. Will you please join me in welcoming Jonathan Noble?
In standard practice, I'm interested in knowing for how many people is today's meeting the first time you've been on this campus? That always shocks me because we literally host over 300 events here, community events like this one, every year. Yesterday, in fact, we had the Bicycle Coalition here for a similar packed house talking about issues of importance to our community around transportation and safety. Today's emphasis on public-private partnerships is of equal importance. And as a son of 2 educators, this is actually one that's very close and dear to my heart. We're thrilled to be able to host this event for the 6th, 7th year in a row. It's a highlight every year. And it's part of the reason why this is so important is it really provides a great opportunity for us to come together as a community, talk, meet with one another, and have those conversations in a safe environment, thriving environment that often leads to innovation. Microsoft here in Silicon Valley is founded on innovation. We've been here for over 30 years, first landing here in '81 and on this campus in '99. Over that time, we've evolved a great deal, and our evolution continues. Most recently, with the acquisition of LinkedIn, our Silicon Valley presence is now over 8,000 engineers strong. This is very much an engineering center for us with home to Mac Office, Xbox Silicon, so anyone who has is into gaming or has friends and kids into gaming, you can tell them that you're at the place where the chips were made, right here. We've got PowerPoint here, Outlook.com, Bing. Every single division of Microsoft has a major engineering presence here, and it's very much part of who we are. The other part of who we are here is around community. Over 85% of the employees of Microsoft here locally participate in our giving program. What does that mean? It means they either volunteer and/or donate to nonprofits in this community. Either way, thank you. Either way, Microsoft steps up to match that effort. $23 per hour for volunteering, 1-for-1 up to $15,000 a year in donations, and you'd be shocked at how many people at Microsoft max out on that number every year. That leads to literally millions of dollars going to local nonprofits and school foundations here locally. So thank you for all you do. We look forward to partnering with you, not only in terms of our involvement in the community, but also through our direct work with Minecraft Education, LinkedIn Learning, a whole host of tools that we use in the education field in partnership with you all to really help make sure that the generation that's coming up and the existing generations are able to thrive every year. With that, it's my honor to welcome Michelle Vonderhaar, Senior Vice President and General Counsel at Veritas, who will be introducing the morning presentation.
Ooh, who got that picture? It is a great honor to be here today. I'm going to have to lower the microphone to someone a little bit shorter. My name is Michelle Vonderhaar. A lot of people get that wrong. It's a pretty tough name, particularly for my 3 young children. I'm a senior vice president and general counsel of Veritas Technologies right here in Mountain View. We are proud to be a Silicon Valley Leadership Group member as we join forces with our peers in the Valley to advance vital issues. And one of the most fundamental ways we can make a difference is by investing in education for children here in the Bay Area and around the world. For tech companies, science, technology, engineering, and mathematics education is particularly important. And we have a diverse pool of young people here in the Silicon Valley area that we want to hope to enhance our innovation and keep us at the forefront of our industry. This is one of the many reasons that I'm proud to be part of Veritas, where doing good and giving back is an integral part of our culture. Like Microsoft, we have something called a Dollars for Doers program and a matching gift program where employees can donate time and get a matching gift of $15 per hour that they donate back to the community, and we match dollar for dollar up to a certain amount for charitable contributions every year. And a company much smaller than Veritas, much smaller than Microsoft, we're about $2.5 billion. But last year alone, our employees, we matched about $500,000 to local charities. So I'm here today. I've met this wonderful gentleman sitting right in front of me to introduce Dr. Jeff Duncan Andrade. He is making a huge difference in inspiring and uplifting the next generation of leaders by providing quality education to kids in our own communities. Jeff is a professor at San Francisco State University and has been named one of the nation's most influential scholars for the past 3 years. He's also the founder of Roses in Concrete, a community charter school in East Oakland, the Teaching of Excellence Network, and the Community Responsive Education Group. As a classroom teacher and school leader in East Oakland for the past 24 years, his pedagogy has been widely studied and acclaimed for producing uncommon levels of social and academic success. In this morning's session, Jeff will be joined on stage by Justin Steele. Justin is a principal at google.org, where he leads Google's U.S. giving to support local communities and global giving. Together, they will discuss what makes equitable education system and how the business community can support students. It's my great pleasure to introduce Justin and Jeff and welcome them to the stage.
I know you've got a little preview for us, Jeff. You want to go ahead and roll it? Sure. So we're going to start with a vignette from a documentary film that's being produced on our community lab school in East Oakland, which was referenced in my bio. I want to give a quick backdrop on how this film gets made, because I think that the story behind the story that they're telling is also important. So this piece that you're going to see is being produced by a London filmmaker who was doing film on transformative educators in the United States. And so he was mostly focusing his interviews on the East Coast, Philly, New York, D.C., Baltimore. And the story behind that film was really trying to capture the voices of educators that are working in some of the most vulnerable and distressed communities, and yet still creating these really compelling outcomes for children. And he was going interview to interview to interview, and he kept hearing about us and the work that we're doing in East Oakland, and so he heard my name and the school's name come up often enough that he finally decides to reach out, and he says, "Hey, I'm going to be flying back through San Francisco. Can I come by the school and meet with you? I've been hearing your name a lot." So we say, sure. He comes by the school, and this is in our first year, where it's I'm in the land of innovation. Y'all remember the first year of Microsoft? Probably not, but because you don't want to remember the first year of Microsoft. And so we're in our first year, and he comes by, and we do the school tour. And if you ever come for a school tour, you're going to see what you're going to see. Like, we have 8-year-olds, so you don't even try to predict what's going to happen. It just happens, and then you can have a conversation about how interesting that was. So he comes, he does the school tour, and when he finishes, he says, I'm really compelled by what I'm seeing, and I need to process this a little bit, and I'd like to have a phone call with you a little bit later. So he leaves, and he calls me later that night, and he says, I want to drop the project that I have right now, and I want to have a conversation with you and your community about doing a story on this school. That's the film I need to make. And so we began a conversation with our community about whether or not they were okay with that. He rebooks his flight. He ends up staying for another several weeks and doing his first round of shooting, interviewing kids, interviewing family members, interviewing teachers. And about 6 months ago, he sent us this piece that you're going to see. So the way his artistic style is that he creates feature-length documentary films about places through vignettes. So he tells the story of place through the lenses of different people that are actually doing the work and living in that place. And so he released this first vignette, and there's actually been quite a bit of media coverage, national media coverage and international media coverage about our work and about this school. And I asked if we could open up with this because I think that this piece captures probably the best of any of the media that I've seen covering us, the essence of both what we're trying to achieve at Roses and Concrete, but also the direction that I believe that we should be pushing the national conversation about public education in our country. So let's roll that as a way to kind of frame the conversation that we'll have today.
Ever journeyed in some of the most hopeless circumstances? If you really seen hopelessness, like if you've seen it, not studied it, not went to visit it, but if you've ever lived in hopelessness, you know how beautiful hope is. I think in order to grow a rose in concrete, it's about cultivating that seed of hope. The concrete represents obstacles and barriers, the substance created in the favor of one group and to the detriment of another, if you will. The concrete could be cold, man. It could claim many names. So every day we come here, it's about planting a seed of hope. See, the tricky thing about hopelessness is that its narrative is everywhere. Our young folks are subject to this time and time and time again. They could look around and see the manifestation, the reality of hopelessness. You can't come with some fairy tale, everything is gonna be okay. It don't work that way, especially when they know otherwise, especially when they get to see how systems limit their access to hope. That's that fairy tale hope. It takes something realer than that to touch families, to touch lives.
When we talk about self-hate, the question is, how do those kids learn self-hate? How do they learn to hate themselves?
You speak it from ground zero, where it's at. That hope is critically engaged. It observes, it recognizes, it acknowledges, and it validates where that person may be in their journey of pursuing hope. But it's gotta be real. So some days you gotta get tired, you gotta get fatigued, because you gotta give it your all. You have to disrupt hopelessness in every angle. Do it creative. Do it through the arts. Do it through the lesson. Do it through gardening. Do it through nature. Do it through rhyme. Do it however you can, but disrupt hopelessness with a passion.
Again, what's the opposite of self-hate? Self-love. So then that's the bigger question, which we need to start figuring out. How do we start to develop self-love? That's the true question. How do you develop self-love?
So every day we open our doors and receive them and love them and hug them and show them that this is a place where you can totally be you. Every day they hear a different narrative, one that builds their self-esteem, builds their reflective self-esteem so they can see themselves in their brothers and their sisters. We want them to really understand that it's what's inside of you that matters most. And what's inside of you isn't predicated on where you come from or your parents' income or what you've seen or limitation. Now, what's inside of you is there. All those things can be barriers to achieving it, but the value is still there.
We are beautiful! We are beautiful! We are creative! We are creative! We matter! We matter! We are intelligent! We are intelligent! We are roses! We are roses! We are family! We are family!
Speak to the power that's within them, the power of their imagination, the power of what they do know, the power of their intentions, and you speak to that thing and you nurture it every single day. I really hope this, that you use your creativity, you use your passion, and believe in doing the impossible. Growing Roses in Concrete is about that work, awakening the learner, awakening that thing inside of them. Why am I here? What am I here to do? The world changes once you find that out. Once you know your why, nothing can stop you. You guys are superheroes. It doesn't take levitation. It doesn't take magic to be a superhero. Sometimes superhero just means having a very super extraordinary belief in your ability to solve a problem, and nothing can stop you from doing it. They're closer to actualizing their own possibility. They're finally starting to get to that place where they can see things not for just how they are, but how they could be, and make the could be their will be. And I want you to know this, that within you is the solution. Don't stop imagining. Don't stop dreaming. Do not stop trying. Dan, start us. If we couple social responsibility, social justice, if we partner that with always aligning with their why, creating a whole new school of young folks who will rise up and become hope dealers, become agents of hope, will always be looking for the crack in the concrete for the rose. That's what we're after.
It's a beautiful film, and that's just the first installment. Is that right?
Yeah. Yep.
So I can't wait to see the next installments. It's a beautiful piece of art, just period. So I'm Justin. I'm a principal at Google.org. I lead all of our philanthropy in the United States, and I first visited Roses 2 years ago, right around the time probably the filmmaker came, because you guys had just opened your doors, and I was stepping into a context where I joined Google 3 years ago. And we've been the largest corporate philanthropy in the Bay Area for 5 of the last 7 years. Last year, we gave $50 million to Bay Area nonprofits, but it wasn't reaching the community when I started. If you went into communities like Deep East Oakland, everybody was saying, tech's doing nothing for us. Like, you guys are absent. Like, we're not feeling any of your philanthropy or love. And so in my first year, a couple colleagues and I took up to the executives the idea of starting a racial justice initiative and starting it here in the Bay Area. And they sort of were pushing us like, what does that mean? What is that going to look like? And we said that we want to start with educational justice and criminal justice. And we got the green light and convinced them and started going to look for models like Roses. And in particular, on the education piece, we didn't want to take like the same approach to the achievement gap. We really wanted to look for something that was sort of innovative, 10x, like really pushing the model. And in particular, we wanted to find models that were pushing on identity formation, emancipatory knowledge, if you want to get really technical with it. But we were looking for models who are really pushing against this sort of systemic idea that our young people in urban communities are somehow less than, or that the culture they're bringing into school is less than, and really attacking that. And so I had a chance to go visit Roses and walk the grounds with Jeff, and it was a powerful experience. You'd be walking down the hall and these kids would be chop blocking Jeff at the knees and, tackling him and hugging him. And Jeff had a story for every single one of those young people. And I was so deeply impressed with just like the narrative and how Jeff had told not only the story of that young person, but oftentimes a generational story, because he would start telling me the story of that young person's parents and how he had taught that young person's parents, and in some cases even held that child in the classroom while that child's parent was finishing their education. And so this model of Roses is very intergenerational. So I have a bunch of questions, and then I definitely want to get to your questions as well. But maybe just to start, Jeff, just give us a little bit of context for your journey to starting Roses. The young people in your school, you've been teaching in Deep East for over 20 years. You've taught their parents. Just, I don't want to take too much time on this, but I think it's important for people to maybe be anchored a little bit in your personal narrative and how you ended up getting to Roses, and then we're going to get into some of the questions.
Sure. So when I'm asked about my work as an educator and as a scholar, I often describe it as driving in 4 lanes simultaneously, which for me are a singular lane, but I think in the way in which people ask me about the work and how I came to the work and how I do the work, they think of it differently. And fortunately, I'm in a space where innovation is the norm, so you'll get that idea that to be innovative, you're a lane crosser. You don't stay in your lane. And so first and foremost, I'm a community member. I live in a 3400 block of East Oakland, which is one of the most violent communities in the nation, and has been since the 80s. And it's also one of the most poisoned communities in the nation. There was a study released not too long ago that revealed that our neighborhood has toxicity in the water 100 times the level of the toxicity in the water in Flint. And there's been no national discussion of that, and frankly, no real moral outrage in the Bay Area. And that's where I lay my head every night. That's where I'm raising my 2 sons. I have twin boys that will go to Roses. They're 4.5 now. They think they're ready to start. They're not. So one of the folks that Google has supported with their work is a brother named Brian Stevenson, who's arguably the most influential voice in the legal field right now around death row cases. And one of the things that he says about how we're going to transform these communities that have been entrenched multi-generationally in suffering and vulnerability is by getting proximity to the pain. And so I've always been proximate to the pain. This is how I grew up. And the story that was told to me by my teachers, I'm the youngest of 7 kids, and my teachers always told me that I was different. You're not like your older, my brothers and sisters were running the streets. And they would literally tell me that I was different. And every time an adult in school told me that, I stopped trusting them. Because I wasn't any different than my brothers and sisters. I'm no different than my cousin on the corner. And my teachers weren't in my hood when the sun went down. So they didn't know I was running the streets with my brothers and sisters. But I was the baby. And I was the chosen one. And so when trouble came, I got pushed off the block. I got sent home. And so I feel this intense sense of debt to my community. And my teachers would also tell me that I could use education to get out of here. You can use school to get out of this neighborhood. And that also made me not trust them, because I didn't want to leave my neighborhood. And I didn't want school to teach me how to leave my neighborhood. I wanted school to teach me how to transform my neighborhood. I wanted school to teach me how to end police brutality, how to end gentrification, how to end the violence, how to end the drugs. And they weren't. They were teaching me how to escape it. And that's code. When we tell our kids that, that's code. Because what they were really saying is that my mama was my problem, that my family was my problem. And if I could get away from them, I'd be worth so much more to them, to this society. And I fundamentally reject that. Hey, I understand a difference between schooling and education. And schooling is the process by which we institutionalize people to accept their position in life. And education is the process by which we teach them they can transform it. Hey, and so I'm an educator, first and foremost. And that educational sensibility comes from my sensibility of being raised on the block. Okay? And wanting to become the teacher that I never had. And now wanting to create the school that I never had. And so that lane deeply influences my scholarship. So I'm a tenured professor at San Francisco State University, and a lot of the teaching that I do is combined with research to influence the broader systems discussions, to influence the broader national discussions about what is possible and what is our responsibility. If we truly aim to become a pluralistic, multiracial democracy, what is the role of public schools in that, particularly the role of public schools that are serving the nation's most vulnerable youth? The group that can least afford to have schools failing them is the group that is most likely to have schools failing them. Hey, that's interruptive of the pursuit of a pluralistic, multiracial democracy. And so I'm always considering, too, what is my role as a researcher to influence policy and practice discussions? And then I'm a practitioner. So for 25 years, I've been serving in the classroom and in schools in my community in East Oakland. The majority of that time has been as a high school teacher. And with the last cohort that I taught, we were at a graduation party at my house, and the families and the children were there. And a group of them hemmed me up in my own house. And it was about 10 or 12 of them, parents and students. And two of them were young women who had babies in their senior year. And we held them. We refused to let them go to the where the pregnant girls go, right? We kept them at the high school. And as Justin, there's literally photos and video of me teaching with those babies strapped to my chest. And I'm sure our school board member is here, and I'm sure she's like, is that even legal? And if it's not, it should be, right? So I'm a lane crosser. So we would literally hold the children of our children so they could finish, right, their senior year. They both went to four-year colleges, and they're standing there on my porch holding these babies with their mothers. And they said to me, Jeff, we want you to open a school that starts in kindergarten so that we can have what you gave us in high school for our children all the way through. Okay, so my entire career has been as a high school teacher. And so when we opened Roses in Concrete, we started in elementary school at the behest of our community. And so about 15% of the families that helped us launch the school were literally the children of my former students. And that's so deep for me as an educator, right? To literally be having a conversation with my former student as a parent and having the child that I was there for their birth now in our kinder or our first or our second grade class.
So, Jeff, when I was in graduate school, the Harlem Children's Zone was like capturing the imagination of the country. And I had a chance to meet Jeff Canada, the founder, and really kind of study their model. And one thing that really struck me back then when I was studying that model is that they rejected what Jeff called the kind of quarantine model, particularly in charter schools, but in the broader educational system, that sort of presupposed that you had to quarantine students off from their neighborhood culture. This is very related to what you were just talking about. And in his Promise Academy model, he rejected that. He said, we're not trying to quarantine our students and separate them from their communities. We're actually trying to integrate and almost like push the school culture out back into the neighborhood and have it be sort of symbiotic. And you in your book have argued that urban education movements have to provide young people the opportunity to be successful in maintaining their identities as urban youth. And you also say that students otherwise are going to have to choose to either retain an urban and cultural identity that they perceive to be in conflict with the expectation in the school, even if the cost of that choice is educational marginalization. So some young people are faced with that choice of, am I true to who I understand myself to be, or am I true to the school? And they sometimes will choose to reject the school. So what's your assessment of kind of our educational system, both charter and public, in terms of supporting urban young people's like identity formation?
I mean, I think everything that we know in the research, and what's interesting is you know, I straddle those two worlds, right? The research community and the world of practice in schools. And in the research community, there is virtually no debate about these things, right? About both the essence and the fundamental essence of identity formation, self-love, self-esteem. I mean, you go back to Maslow, right? Maslow releases the hierarchy of needs in 1943. There's nothing currently being used in any school in the United States that has the research base of Maslow. And we're talking about cross-disciplinary too. Public health, social epidemiology, neuroscience, the medical field, all agree that Maslow's more or less right. The pinnacle of Maslow is self-actualization. The most successful students self-actualize. The tier just below self-actualization, so the window into self-actualization, is self-esteem, right? And at the core of self-esteem is self-love. Like you value yourself for who you are. You love who your ancestors are. You love your neighborhood. And we have so many young people that literally hate themselves. They hate the color of their skin. They hate the texture of their hair. They hate the language they speak. They hate the neighborhood they come from. They hate their ancestral traditions. That self-love is literally biochemically and neurologically interruptive of their ability to fully show up in school. And yet we're debating about whether or not we should be, right, as a part of our educational paradigm, teaching kids to love themselves, teaching kids to like develop and really value their cultural and personal and community identities. We shouldn't be debating that in education because we don't debate it anymore in the research field. So if we're going to be research-based, right, why aren't we actually pulling from these tremendous breakthroughs we've had in the last 10 to 15 years, particularly in neuroscience? I've been doing a lot of work with neurobiologists over the past 7 to 10 years. And one neurobiologist in New Zealand actually told me, he said, he said there's only one field in the last decade that has had more advances than neuroscience. Okay? And I'm sitting in the heart of it right now. Okay? I mean, think about this 10 years ago, right? And he said that's the only field that's had more advances than us. He says, we have learned more about the brain in the last 10 years than we knew in the last 100 years combined. And yet, those understandings are not impacting policy and practice in schools. And one of the core things that we've found is the way in which inequality, and particularly radicalized inequality, is toxic for the body and is interruptive of strong identity formation, which is then interruptive of self-esteem, which is then interruptive of the pathway to self-actualization, which is then interruptive of true fulfillment and engagement in school. So we actually know what to do. We've known for a long time. The biggest gap in our field right now is the knowing-doing gap. Hey, we have really solid about 3.5, 4 years of decades for 3.5 to 4 decades of research about what works, why it works, and how it works. The challenge for us right now in the field, right, is how do we create the space and the resource to innovate in schools, to figure out how to move from theory to practice.
I read Jeff's book, Art of Critical Pedagogy, like 3 weeks ago, so I'm going to keep quoting because it's brilliant, and I finally got around to reading it, so you're going to have to suffer through some more quotes from Jeff's book, but it's definitely worth a read if you have the time. So, Jeff, the title of this panel was like Equity and Equality and the difference between the two, and I want to ask a question that kind of gets to this notion of what equity looks like. You said in your book that, quote, deep down our nation subscribes to the belief that someone has to fail in school, and that our schools are essentially a rigged social lottery, where we sort low-income urban students of color into the lowest position of the labor force and society. Now, I'm a parent. I have 3 kids, 3 daughters, 8, 6, 4. 2 of them are in Oakland Unified Schools, and I'd be lying if I told you that I didn't consider at various points bringing them into private schools. And even despite the fact that they're in Oakland Unified, I supplement their education. Like, this summer they're in acting class, they're in swim class, I'm supplementing at every step of the way as a well-resourced parent to supplement their education. And so my question to you is, what does equity in an educational system look like when parents like me are capable of, 1, opting out of public education, and 2, even if we don't opt out of public education, we're heavily supplementing our kids' education? So what does equity look like in a free market economy where we allow this kind of thing to happen?
So the work that I'm doing around the country right now is really helping policymakers, school leaders, practitioners, business leaders disentangle the idea of equity and equality. Okay? And I'm asked with a fairly high level of frequency to be a thought partner for some of the nation's largest school systems on their equity plan, their equity framework. And I am shocked, so much so that I've literally, my lead talk on the lecture circuit right now is the title of this session, right? Equity versus equality, which one will we choose? And I developed this talk because of the frequency with which I saw, and even in conversations with Google, even in conversations with Facebook, other organizations, these terms get conflated, right? And equity and equality are fundamentally different. And the difference, if we're going to pivot from equality to equity, it's a hard pivot. It's not a soft pivot. Okay? And for me, the definition of equity is that you get what you need when you need it, right? Which means by definition, we have not only a fundamentally unequal school system, but it's also inequitable. The worst kept secret in the United States is that those who need the least get the most in schools, and those who need the most get the least in schools. Everybody knows that. The poorest kids go to the least resourced schools. Okay? And the wealthiest kids, when staying in public school, go to the best resourced public schools. Everybody knows that. Okay? So this is why we call it a rigged social lottery. And then, right, it gets supplemented. So you have the summer learning gap. You have all these other ways in which, right, wealthier parents are able to resource their children. And of course, like, I'm going to do that same thing for my sons, right? They're going to get access to all kinds of things that I didn't get access to a kid. So I think the goal is to interrupt that. The goal is to balance that out, right? So how do we change the way in which we invest in the most vulnerable youth? The youth that are never going to have the level of supplement that my kids have or that your kids have. And what is our moral and civic responsibility to do that? Okay? And the truth is that the overwhelming majority of economists argue that that's the best thing we could actually do for sustainability in our economy. That we are hemorrhaging a tremendous amount of talent inside this nation state right now because we're loath to invest in the children that need the investment the most. And it's hurting us, right? In the broader global economy and in terms of our own social stability in this country. And so we're either going to make a decision as a nation to invest on the front end or the back end. And right now, this nation has chosen to invest in the back end. Okay? No nation in the world incarcerates more of its citizens than the United States. Okay? It's not even close. Russia's a distant second. Okay? We're kicking ass and locking people up. Okay? That seems sort of anti-democratic to me. Right? So the alternative to that is to invest in the front end. Right? And to invest in the communities and in the families that right now we're hyper investing to prepare on the back end for them to not succeed in our society. And the only way to alter that investment is to invest in children. And from my perspective, the single longest term gain, and the research bears this out as well, for investing in children is investing in high quality teachers. Right? If we can transform who's teaching and how they're supported and how they're developed over time, then we can transform outcomes. I don't see any other way we do that, and there's nothing in the research that suggests that any other investment has the potential for a bigger impact than that.
All right, I'm going to ask one more question, and I'm actually going to combine two of the questions that I had left to ask you. One of the things that really struck me in your book, you talked about teaching in the high school and how you had this very, very deep impact on the young people that you were allowed to touch in your classroom and through your coaching. But now you look back at that high school and it's fundamentally unchanged. It's still a very unequal school with low educational outcomes. So I'm curious, one, about how do we think about systems change? How do we take and extrapolate what you are able to achieve in your classrooms and extrapolate that to schools, to districts, to regions, to the country? And let's combine that with a question of how can corporations, particularly here in Silicon Valley, support that? I mean, we're all about big scale. I know nonprofits get tired of me saying, how are you going to scale this? It's a question I have to ask because Google's so passionate about scaling. And of course, we gave you $750,000 to try to take a big bet in your first year to give you some sort of resources to scale up. So I'm sure resources is one thing, but even talk about the resources, but also talk about beyond the resources. I mean, what's the role of companies in being able to support you in helping to scale this thing up?
Yeah, and thanks for that $750K, by the way.
We're trying to get you some more,
Yeah,
Jeff.
yeah. Appreciate that. Money matters. Ask wealthy communities. They'll tell you there's a reason that they resource their schools. Look, what we know in the research, and any practitioner will tell you this too, that and study after study at scale confirms this. The single biggest factor in student achievement. Anybody? What do you think? Teacher quality. It's not income. It's not parent education. It's not your exposure to words when you're 3. Like, all that stuff matters, of course. But the single biggest indicator of student achievement is teacher quality. And we're loath to invest, right, in that side of, right, our workforce. So one of the things that Roses in Concrete is designed as a lab school. So we receive visitors from all over the country with a fairly high level of frequency. In fact, we're hosting a national conference right now with 80 educators and school leaders from around the nation. So we actually bring other schools into our PD when we're running PD. And one of our another school that we partner with is sitting right over here. Anyway, to share the way in which we support and develop teachers. One of the things that we shared with you all is a program that Google helped us launch and that we're now trying to begin to scale. And we've partnered with Stanford and Berkeley and San Francisco State to do some research around the impact of this. But one of the things that we're trying to build is a national model for how do you create urban teacher pipelines? How do we create this pathway for young people from our community to both push through our K-12 system, but seeing themselves as people that are going to return to the community as educators. One of the biggest costs right now for public school districts is teacher leaving. The national data suggests that 50% of teachers leave the profession within the first 2 years. The cost, I mean, I'm in the world of business right now. You know what the cost of that is, right? It's a massive cost. And there's pretty clear research about why that happens. And that research reveals pretty clearly that a solution, which is that if we start investing earlier, we start developing teachers earlier, and we start developing an internal pipeline, the likelihood that those teachers not only return to the community but stay in the community for an arc of professional growth the research there is pretty compelling. And so part of what we're building as in our lab school is this pipeline for Oakland, but then talking about how can corporations in modeling a partnership with us begin to think about how you might do that in Baltimore, how you might do that in DC, how you might do that in New York. Most of the problems, the most pressing problems that we're facing in schools, we have answers for. Right. The open question is whether or not we are going to commit to these broader set of partnerships to resource and support and build those innovative solutions out so that we can stop having to have this conversation about educational equity in this nation.
Do we have time for maybe one or two questions from the audience? One? You guys want to pass them a mic, or do you want to just have them stand and deliver? Maybe just take this one right here. You got a mic in the back?
Use your teacher voice.
So I was a teacher for 14 years, and one of the things that I really felt is that. You hear me? So one of the things that I felt. Thank you. One of the things that I felt, I could be the best teacher that I could be, and I think I was a great teacher. Taught for 14 years, South Bronx, East Oakland. Yet, when I look at what happened to my students, they didn't persist when they went out of college. And I felt that one of the reasons they didn't persist is because I was preparing them for college. I wasn't preparing them for life. How do you address helping young people build social capital? Yes, self-love, but ultimately, they need to be able to interact with all of these people and get jobs. So how are you addressing that?
Yeah, so I think it needs to be addressed on both sides, right? Part of the reasons why we don't stay in college and why we struggle when we get into corporate environments is because universities and corporate environments aren't actually committed in deep ways to equity and diversity, right? And
Don't ask me about the memo, Jeff.
okay. I'm just saying, okay? I'm just saying. So, okay. Y'all heard what he said? Okay, right. So, there's some work to be done on both sides, right? And power, right, is often the group that is the last to come around to change, right? And if we're leaders, right, then we lead in the change. But I think the piece that you're pointing out is also important, and it goes back to Justin's question of identity. So what the research suggests about why many first-generation college students leave, and I was literally ink and paper away from withdrawing from UC Berkeley as a freshman because of my experience right at UC Berkeley. And here's the way in which I describe it to teachers and school leaders. What we are doing right now in the broader educational discourse is that we are focused on growing a set of trees, our young people, right, that have strong, broad trunks and big branches and beautiful foliage. And above the ground, they are beautiful. So they have test scores. They're eligible to apply. They're eligible to go. Okay? But they have shallow roots. They don't have a strong identity. And so when they get to when I got to college, right? First gen, my roommate, his pops was the vice president of General Mills. He had a perfect score on the SAT. I cheated to pass the SAT. I won't tell you how I did that. Okay? And I'd never been in an environment like that. He's walking in with a brand new computer and a refrigerator, and I have one bag on my back. And it's immediately clear to me that I'm a rose of a different color, right? And my identity is suddenly questioning, do I belong here? I had all the test scores. I was ready for the work, but my roots were shallow. Okay? So what we're doing at Roses, and what I think a lot of the research suggests results in longevity for those young people, both through college and in the professional workforce, is when they have deep roots. Because when the storm comes for the tree with deep roots, it stands up in the storm. And it can hold up other trees with shallow roots when those trees begin to go down. So if we do that identity work with young people, if they really love themselves and they know who their ancestors are and they know their value, then when the university gets hard, right, then they stay. But if they don't have that, when that storm comes, those kids go down. And so you're absolutely right to point that out. And I think that we can do a better job in K-12 of preparing kids, as you said, for life and for what university life is like. And the university, if they really want us there, okay, can begin to invest more in the cultures that they develop to support those students in that way, as can the professional world and the business world.
So I must confess, it is an unenviable task to be the person to transition us away from this. So let's give one more round of applause to Dr. Duncan Andrade and Justin Steele. And there was so much in there, but I'll just highlight a couple of things that stood out to me, just some snippets. The way to make transformation is by getting proximity to the pain. The most successful students self-actualize, and that core to this is self-love and self-esteem. Equity is about getting what you need when you need it, and that we have a moral and civic responsibility to ensure that our students have that. So once again, one more round of applause. Now we're going to move to the breakout sessions. If you look at the corner of your name tag, you can find which panels you're going to be moving to. There's S1 for first session, and then S2 for the second session. You can find the rooms that correspond to that on the agenda. The STEM coalitions will stay here. For those of you who are staying here, though, we're going to get a little bit cozier and move to the front. So go ahead and start transitioning. We're going to start promptly at 9:05.
Okay, well, I will just give you a book then. I'll give you a book, but we have very long conversations. Very long conversations. Very good. I will, Harry.
Okay. We're going to start transitioning now to the STEM panel. Okay. You go do that.